Hello everyone, Dom here, and in this video I'm going to be answering your questions, the questions that you send me on YouTube and Instagram. This is going to be my first Q&A video. I'm really excited about this, so let's get started. A few weeks ago, I asked you to send me your questions, any kind of question, on YouTube and Instagram. And quite frankly, I was blown away on how many questions I received, so I'm going to start this video by saying that there's going to be a part 2 because there's no way I can answer all these questions in one video. So I'm going to start straight away. I'm going to pick the questions randomly. Before we start, if you enjoy this video, leave a like so I know and I make a part 2 answering your questions, and also leave me more of your questions down below. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, and if you really enjoy this channel, support using the super thanks button down below or checking one of my instruments right here. So let's get started. I'm going to start with a question from YouTube. Musictron, how did you progress as a mixer and do you have any tips? I would say that the biggest thing for me to progress as a mixer was to mix so many different genres and so much music. That's the secret to becoming a good mixer. I used to mix EDM, I used to mix metal music, I used to mix rock, pop. I think that pop is probably one of the hardest genres to mix. Because I'm doing a lot of trailer music, I had to mix orchestral music. But it's different if it's modern trailer music, cinematic music, and different when it's like classical music. It's very different when it's jazz music. The secret to becoming a good mixer is to have a good understanding of the basics of every music genre. I've seen many mixers that are amazing when it comes to mixing rock music, go and mix a jazz track and they completely get it wrong because they start compressing the snares and start EQing to death and all these things, which is not what you want to do. When you approach, for example, a classical recording, then you need to be super delicate, but you need to know what you're doing. You need to know the placement of the instruments in the orchestra, in the stereo field. All these things, you can't really learn them by watching a tutorial. You have to also know a little bit about the music style. So if you don't know that your violins are on the left channel and the cellos are on the right channel, then you've already made a bad decision. What's the story and theory behind the music? Not theory in terms of, music theory necessarily, but the soundscape and the sound signatures for every genre. Especially when you're starting out, my suggestion is that even if you're really into a specific type of music, like, I don't know, you might like house music or you might prefer rock music, I would say spread out and try and get as much knowledge for pretty much all the music styles. Because at first you won't have the luxury to choose, I'm only going to mix rock guys, or I'm only going to mix pop artists, or I'm only going to mix jazz. You might get a variety of things and you have to be prepared to mix all these things efficiently. So I would say try and mix as many genres as possible. Try to get as much material into your DAW and start mixing, and then you will face the challenges so that you can overcome them. If you don't face the challenges and if you don't make a bad mix, then you have nothing to improve on. So, used to ask, when have you started playing a musical instrument and composing music? How did Steinberg get in touch with you on these tutorial videos? How much insight do you receive upfront for new versions? How much involvement do you have in the direction of the next version? Which feature are you seeing in other DAWs you wished Cubase had? Well, this is quite a few questions, but they're really, really interesting. I started playing the piano at the age of 5 to 6, and basically I just started taking piano lessons, and I started composing music when I was, I want to say, 8 years old. So I still have my cassettes with my first songs, which are really interesting to listen back and listen to the young version of you, the kid version of you actually. But of course after this I got seriously into composing music at the age of 15. I started getting my first professional jobs. How did Steinberg get in touch with you? Okay, this is an interesting one because I get this question all the time. I've been a Steinberg user user pretty much all my professional life, actually before I even became a professional. So I started using Cubases back in the day, which was a cut down version of Cubase, and basically I built my whole career using Cubase. I did lots of library work, I did film composing, I did production, mixing, mastering, all these things I was doing in Cubase. So the first time I met the people from Steinberg was at a show here in London where I actually went to check out the new version of Cubase. So this was our first contact. After a few years actually, we got in touch and they asked me if I could produce some content for the channel and if I'm interested in doing some specialist Cubase work. So this is how it all started. I didn't know anyone from Steinberg. Now, how much do I know? The thing is, I'm a beta tester for many companies. So sometimes I get early access, sometimes I don't. It really depends on the project and the product. So a feature that I wish existed in Cubase that exists in another DAW. I'm trying to think of something. I'm not sure if this necessarily exists in another DAW, but I would really like Cubase to have MS processing on all the plugins. That basically you can do this with Wavelab, and this is one of the reasons why I use Wavelab when I'm doing mastering. But I wish that Cubase had like MS processing in every channel on the mixer, like it has everything else, pre-gain, the filters, all these things. MS processing would be super cool because you could turn any plugin into MS, regardless of whether it supports MS or not. So that would be something. I'm not exactly sure if DAW has this built in the mixer. Like, I'm talking built-in, not using a utility, right? Because you can do this in Cubase very easily, but you know, it's not built in the mixer. So that would be one thing that I would like to see. Hi Dom, I love your channel and thank you for everything you do. My question, as a film scoring professional, how do you get contacted most often from clients? How do they discover your music or get to know you? That's a very good question and this could be an entire video. It really depends on where you are in your career. If you're starting out, I would suggest that you compose as much music as possible and you build a portfolio of varied music styles. So you can try epic, you can try emotional, you can try pop, you can try creating quirky music, any kind of music that could be useful in syncing. The other thing I would suggest is try and build relationships with directors and directors that are upcoming and maybe producers that are starting working on interesting projects that you would like to score. Now, if you're already a professional, things are a little bit different because you get contacted for jobs, and this can be a little bit easier and you might be able to get to choose who you're gonna work with. So I do a lot of music for advertising. This is how I started out actually. I started doing music for advertising, and once you do a few jobs, then you're going to start getting some recognition and you're going to start getting more jobs. The same happens not only with composing but with music production and songwriting. So when I started working back in the day with a really famous songwriter, I just couldn't stop my phone from ringing after this, because all of a sudden I was working for him and many people wanted to work with me. So these are just a few pointers, but this is a good topic for a video. Jeff asks, how do Cubase Pro's stock plugins compare with other DAWs like Pro Tools, Studio One and Logic? I used to use Logic, but I don't want to use an Apple-only product anymore. I'm thinking of transferring to either Cubase or Studio One. When we start comparing DAWs, what I always say is don't listen to me, don't listen to anyone. Try them and see what works best for you. The one thing that I can say for sure is that don't listen to people that only use or only have ever used one DAW, because these are the worst people that you can ask for advice about a DAW, because they're going to tell you if they're using Logic, oh, Logic is the best. If they're using Ableton Live, oh, Ableton Live is the best. If they're using Cubase, Cubase is the best. I've been working in studios for a long time, so I've used Pro Tools extensively, I've used Cubase obviously, I've used Ableton Live, I've used Studio One, I've used Reaper. Of course, not in the same amount, like I've used Cubase throughout my whole career, but I know Pro Tools inside out. I know Logic very well. So when it comes to stock plugins, I would say that pretty much all the DAWs nowadays have some amazing stock plugins. Logic has some really cool ones. Cubase has I think, some of the best stock plugins around. It's just that people don't tend to know them. They don't tend to dig into them. That's why I make so many videos about stock Cubase plugins, because I don't think you need to spend money in order to get a great plugin. You have it inside your DAW already. One thing that I've noticed though, while I was mixing for 10 years in a row and I was getting mixes from anywhere around the world, is that at some point there was a trend where pretty much everyone would use the same Logic loops. So you would get a track from the US sounding pretty much the same like a track that came from Georgia. And it was insane. It was really frustrating for me as a mixer to see that, okay, these two artists have just used loops and they sound pretty much identical. They don't even know each other, but they actually use the same material. And I would say, if something is available to pretty much everyone, be very cautious with it, especially nowadays that so many people use loops and phrases and vocals from libraries and all sorts of things. There are many online services that do that. And then some people register a song and then you get flagged on YouTube when you post your song because somebody else has already posted a song with that loop. It has happened to me as well when I'm doing demos. Once I tried to use a loop, a drum loop for a video, for my API video actually, and it got flagged because this loop has been used by somebody for a track, and basically that's it. So be careful with things that are readily available for everyone, and especially with software that's super popular and everyone has access to, okay? I think you get my point. Emre asks a wild question. Do you engineer, mix and master songs from any artist? What would be the cost? Can I get more details? Yes, of course, I do this. This is my main line of business. This is pretty much what I do. Contrary to what some people believe, I'm not a full-time YouTuber. YouTube is something that I do on the side. I try to do it during weekends when I have a little bit of time. And this is because I enjoy it. I enjoy spreading the knowledge. I enjoy this community that we have. I know I don't advertise this on YouTube. I am aware of that. But if you go on my website, you can get in touch with me and tell me what you need. Mixing, mastering, production. I do pretty much everything. And actually, quite a few of the artists that I work with are also viewers from my YouTube channel. So yeah, just get in touch with me. Kreisman asks, how did you get into the music industry? Okay, now we have to go way back. So my first music-related job was creating library music. If you don't know what library music is music that can be used for syncing. So for example, for TV shows, it can be played in various places like stores. It can be played on the radio for jingles. It can be played in cruise ships. So that was my first job as a composer. I was doing loads and loads of music like this. I started producing on a PC running Windows 98 with not even a synth. It was a Yamaha PSR keyboard, and basically I was recording every channel separately from the Yamaha PSR. That's how I started getting into the music industry. And after this, I started working with quite a few people in the music industry. I started doing productions, I started doing mixing, mastering, and after this, because I started acquiring some connections in the industry, I started doing productions, composing for pop artists, for bands, mixing, mastering, all these things. But yes, I started basically doing library music, and what I was doing back then was producing around 20 to 40 tracks per month, and I would deliver them on a CD. And this is actually how I paid for my first gear ever. This is how I bought my first synth. This is how I got my first proper audio interface, and so on and so forth. What do you think about Spectrosonics plugins, Omnisphere, Keyscape, Trillian, Stylus, RMX? They're amazing. They've been around for ages, especially our Stylus RMX has been around for like, I want to say over 10 years now, maybe more. I've been using Atmosphere, that was a Rompler basically. And when Omnisphere came out, I was like, okay, this is amazing. Keyscape is also fantastic. Trillian is also great. I will tell you my honest opinion about Spectrosonics plugins. I think the only thing that I can find as a negative with the Spectrosonics plugins is that, number one, they're always cranked to the max. So sometimes they clip. You load a preset and it's already clipping, so you have to do your gain staging, so you need to be aware of that. But I can't blame them, because this is what Some designers do. Sometimes I do it myself. I try not to do it. And the second thing is, especially with the basses and the synths, but even with the keyscape stuff, they are so rich that you really have to know what you're doing when it comes to the mixing stage to make them sit well in the mix. You need to filter a lot, you need to EQ quite a bit in order to make them a little bit more mix compatible. Because I think that these presets were created with the wow factor in mind. So you would sit on a keyboard and you would play them and you would be like, wow, you know, that thing, that kind of thing. Or go to a trade show and do demos, you know. I get this, I know this because I've been demoing for a long time for companies, and I know that this is something that works. But when it comes to mixing, the sounds need to be way smaller. They can't be so big and over the top, because then you end up with a clutter mix. But if you know how to fix it in the mix, you're all good. Chris asks, Dom, do you mind discussing your video creation equipment and process? Absolutely, Chris. I'm actually thinking of making a video. If you're interested, let me know about this, but I'm more than happy to share. So the way I shoot my videos, I shoot on Sony cameras. I'm a long time Sony user, so I'm using the a7S III and the a7 IV currently, also the FX6 sometimes. But before you start checking these online and checking out the prices, I have to tell you that this is not what I would consider an average setup. Actually, this is not an average setup. I'm using all this gear because I'm also running a video production business. And when we produce videos, I'm also making music for the videos. So it actually works out very well. So this is the reason why I have a little bit of a top-end gear. I don't think that this is the way to go. I think that if you want to start a YouTube channel, you can actually do it with your phone, or you can get a nice small compact camera like the ZV-1. The Sony ZV-1 is great for this, and it will do an amazing job. When I'm using PC, I'm using OBS to record my voiceover and whatever comes from my Cubase output, and my voiceover goes through a microphone that's right here. This is a Sennheiser MKH418 shotgun microphone, which again I would have never bought for YouTube videos, but I use it for video production projects as a boom mic, so it makes sense. So again, I don't think you need such high-grade gear to produce a video. My voiceover goes through the Neve Portico 2 channel strip. I've made a video about this, and I don't think I'm gonna change this setup anytime soon. Sometimes I use a lav mic if I have to move around and this setup doesn't really work. And myself and my team edit on Final Cut Pro and DaVinci Resolve. Final Cut Pro, I find that it's the quickest NLE when it comes to YouTube content. I used to use Premiere Pro back in the day and I started hating it, so I'm not touching it anymore. The only thing that I use from Adobe these days is Photoshop and Lightroom. Liam asks, would you be interested in getting sound samples from one of your viewers that might be able to incorporate into your work? You know what? Actually, I was thinking about this. I'm thinking, and let me know in the comments down below, that maybe at some point you guys can send me one of your productions and maybe we can mix it on the channel. And that's something that I would be really interested in doing. And this way, not only the person that sends me the mix will learn something and will also get a final mix in the end, but also I think that everyone else will benefit, because one of the things that's really challenging is when you watch like big mixing engineers doing tutorials and workshops, they usually work on the top of the top, the creme de la creme material. It's not fair. They pull up the faders and it's like the mix is ready and they just add all the nice stuff, you know, the analog gear, and the material is already 80% there. It's really good. But what happens if you're a producer that you're starting out and maybe your productions need a little bit of help? How can you get to a great result? So I was thinking of doing this. The only thing that I'm aware of is that if we show this on YouTube, I'm completely honest with you, and then, you know, you decide to release your track and then the video gets flagged, this is going to be really annoying. So that's the only thing that kind of worries me, but maybe we can find a workaround. Let me know if you're interested though, because I think this would be super cool. I see you have tons of orchestral libraries, but I wanted to ask you, what is your go-to strings library that you always open up first and why? Okay, so I've done a video on my favorite string libraries. If you haven't watched this, I don't have one specific library, I have to be honest with you. Most of the times what I do is I plan ahead, think what kind of string sound I'm going to use, what kind of articulations I'm going to need. And for example, if I want really sharp staccatos, then I might use Vienna Symphonic Library, VSL, the synchron strings. If I want super lush cinematic legatos, maybe I'm going to use the East-West Hollywood strings, or maybe I'm going to use the Cinesamples strings. Or if I want something a little bit more eclectic, I might go for a library like the Afflatus strings from Stress of Sampling. If I want something a little bit more classical, I might go to Iconica from Steinberg, because they make amazing this kind of Beethoven sound. They've nailed it, you know, Mozart, Beethoven, all these things. So it really depends. I don't just open a library because it's my favorite. I just open the best library for the job. And this is what saves you time, and this is what makes you more efficient. Okay, I don't want this video to become super long, so I'm going to also answer a few of the questions that I received on Instagram. But if you enjoyed this video and you like it and you want me to do a part 2 answering the rest of the questions, please leave a like, leave a comment, and also leave me more questions down below, so I'm going to answer them on the next Q&A video. Why don't you use Nuendo? I do use Nuendo. When I'm doing lots of surround work, or when I'm doing dialogue editing, ADR, it's great. I don't think that anything can beat Nuendo when it comes to these things, and that's why so many studios are moving to Nuendo, especially studios that do a lot of post-production, studios that work with Netflix and all these things. I think it's the future, so I'm using Nuendo. I love it. What's your main source of income? How do you afford all the gear shown in Studio Tour? Like I said, many people assume that I'm a full-time YouTuber or something, and for some reason this allows me to buy all this gear. I've built my studio in the course of 20 years. So my main source of income is writing music for film, writing music for advertising, mixing, mastering, music production, which I do a lot of it. I also run a video production company here in the UK, and this is a big part of what I do. So pretty much all my income comes from music, mixing, mastering, and video production. Additionally, I create content for many companies, videos, I do consulting, I do sound design, which is also a big part of what I do. I do loads of sounds for hardware synths, for plugins. I do plugin presets. You can find many of my presets on many plugin companies, and maybe you don't even realize. But in a nutshell, this is the core part of what I do and how I make my income. Okay, my friends, this is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this first Q&A video, and don't forget, if you want me to answer your questions, just leave them in the comments down below. Leave a like so that I know that you enjoyed this, and I'm going to make a part 2 pretty soon with all the questions that I already have from you and all the questions that I'm going to receive. Maybe there's going to be a part 3, who knows, but this has been really fun for me. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe as well, and if you really enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, please use the super thanks button down here, or you might want to check my instruments, my Apollo expansion for Patch Shop, or my modern 80s kit, and the Collapse Vault instrument for Halion Sonic. So, thanks so much for watching, my friends, and I'll see you on the next Q&A and the next video soon. Bye-bye.